Google lawsuit marks end of Washington's love affair with big tech. That's the headline of an NPR article published this week. The US Justice Department and 11 state attorney generals have filed a Blockbuster lawsuit against Google, accusing it of being an illegal monopoly because of its dominance over internet search. The US government alleges that Google has come by its wild success, controlling around 80% of the market in US internet searches, a valuation which eclipsed $1 trillion unfairly. It said multi-billion-dollar deals Google has struck to be the default search engine in many of the world's web browsers, and smartphones have boxed out its rivals. So Sam, before we get into this story, are there any details that you want to add?
Yeah, sure. This is, to be honest, this is a really important story. One of those kind of boring but extremely important stories. I was talking to a few people who are working in tech industry and at very high levels of tech industry, and they said that since the famous Microsoft lawsuit,
Mm-hmm.
this is the biggest basically lawsuit. There was a famous Microsoft lawsuit which, uh, to be honest, ended up they ended up sort of in a compromise in a way, because nobody. I mean, you could say Microsoft got fined and all that, but in the end it really won, because it won the markets and all that.
Because they
But
wanted to break it up, right? They wanted to break down
yeah,
Microsoft
yeah.
into smaller companies, right? Which they didn't succeed.
No, they didn't do that, but they did fine it, and they did have to change their practices. They had to, for example, allow allow other companies to access to certain, I believe it's called API, if I'm not mistaken,
Mm-hmm.
or something like that. And there had to be a council of three people who, for 5 years, constantly monitored them. They had to allow other browsers on their operating system, that type of thing. And actually, to be honest, Google was one of the companies that was at the time accusing Microsoft of monopolistic behavior and illegal activities that leads to creation of monopolies. But now, sort of the tables have sort of turned now. But this is one of those stories that kind of needs a big context. Let me just start with the fact that there has been a shift within American enforcement mentality. Over the last 20 years, they shifted towards less aggressive sort of policy, less aggressive antitrust practices, uh, in a way that they saw mergers and that type of thing, instead of largely opposing them, which usually, like, that's the whole point of antitrust thing. Like when it's a massive merger, for
Yeah,
example.
antitrust is about breaking down monopolies, right? It's about when a monopoly has been established in a market, right?
Yeah, basically, yeah. But they're used to break down monopoly. There are a set of laws, organizations that try to um, uh, try to prevent creation of monopolies or break them down when they are created. But during the last 20 years, because the thinking is that why our monopolies are bad. They are bad because they
They can fix prices, they stifle competition, they prevent any other
sure, sure.
companies for appearing, they can control the system. I mean, just with their size, it comes all these things that they can
Yeah,
do.
but well, they're bad because they're bad for economic viability of the country, right? That's the short of it. But how do we define the economic viability of the country, especially during the last 20 years, but even like 1960s probably onwards. I think 1970s maybe onwards, especially with the creation of the customers production organization or something. Anyway, with that, the focus has been that because they hurt the consumers, because they can raise the prices on consumers, because they cause inflation, right? But because recently the thinking has been No, that's not been the case. Actually, mergers leads to big companies passing the savings to consumers. So we don't need to be as aggressive about it. We
Because of
just need to
economies of scale, kinda, I would assume, right? Because
exact.
they can provide a cheaper service since they control the whole market.
Yeah, exactly. Basically, the same argument that people who are sort of pro estate nationalization in a way, because central control, economies of scale, blah blah blah. But the interesting thing is that yeah, basically that's how they define economic viability, the
Mm-hmm.
savings that is passed on to the consumers. So they haven't been as aggressive, but this could be basically this could signal or at least show a complete shift again towards a far more aggressive policy, at least towards Silicon Valley um, companies, because this Google lawsuit is part of a larger shift. There has been, especially Republicans have been very aggressive towards Silicon Valley companies because they view them. Their argument, their problem is more about political bias. They
Mm-hmm.
argue, I think falsely, to be honest, they argue falsely that there is a left-wing bias within Silicon Valley companies, which trickles down to their platforms, and they argue that the platforms favor left wing. To be honest, you could argue they have a centrist bias, I think,
Yeah.
but left wing bias. Anyway, but that's the view that the Republicans take. There are a few like Elizabeth Warren that have also criticized, obviously Bernie Sanders, that have criticized them for their basically capitalistic or that type of behavior, and the fact that they are hoarding money and destroying other industries. But the thing that has been more publicized is definitely Republican attacks, especially after Trump became president and constantly accused them of collaborating with the fake media or whatever. There was a uh, about 5 6 months ago there was a Congress committee, and the CEO of Apple, Twitter, and Facebook, I believe, they all testified in that committee. uh, I think that one was specifically about political bias, I think. But there was also a report by the there was a Justice Department. Wait, there was a report by a House Antitrust Subcommittee into Amazon, Apple, Google, and Facebook that alleged that the tech giants wield monopoly or substantial power and have abused it. So basically, the FTC, which is the Federal Trade Commission, well, it's Federal Trade Commission. It's an organization that is basically the organization that pushes, they push for uh, for U.S. government to basically take action against monopolies. They've been pushing for Google, Amazon, Facebook, and Twitter. They've been pushing for U.S. government to take action against these organizations, these private companies, because they believe they have a chokehold over the industries, and they act as a sort of a gatekeeper. You know, some of the examples they use, for example, they say that Facebook, when they bought Instagram, that was an illegal act because that wasn't buying a new technology, that was really buying a competition out, basically. They also say, for example, Facebook owns Instagram and WhatsApp, and they can allow interconnectivity within that system that they don't allow with other uh, apps, which again they say is an monopolistic behavior and illegal act because, for example, phones, you can use any phone to contact somebody on any other phone, but it's somewhat complicated. I don't
Mm-hmm.
quite understand all of the details, but yeah, basically they're going really. It's- with the Google, the case is a bit different. With the Google, it's more focused on their advertising uh, business, and they say they've been paying phone companies to have Google as their automatic search engine, as their, as the default search engine, which gives them over, I believe, 90% of the market
Yeah, in the
of this.
US, I know they have around 80% share. I think in the US, in other worldwide, it's somewhere 90%. I was looking into this for something different
Who is
a while
using
ago.
Yahoo or Bing
But
in the U?
Bing
It's
exactly in
interesting.
the US, there's like around it's like 7 to 10% are using
Wow.
Bing. And you know it's so funny, but we don't even realize for this other project I got to know Bing a bit. And all
Hmm.
these tools that Google offers, so analytics and everything, Bing also has all of these things, but who gets
Yeah,
to use them and
um,
what?
but Bing is also owned by
Yeah,
Microsoft.
yeah,
Like,
it's owned by
what's the
Microsoft. Yeah,
point of like using?
yeah,
It's like this. Yeah, it's like the weaker version of Google. But
yeah.
anyway, um, um, yeah. So all these come Amazon, uh, for its retail. Although I think Amazon and Apple were in a slightly lower category of danger, so to speak. They were like, suspicious.
Yeah,
Keep an eye out on them type thing. But Google, Facebook, and Twitter, they're going very strongly after. And this Google lawsuit is quite a big one. It's been described, as you said, a blockbuster lawsuit.
yeah.
Google and I would assume the other CEOs. This was what the CEO of Google argued, that this is flawed, and it's will only stifle competition, and competition only leads to innovation. And the reason why we have the 90% of the market is because we offer the best services, and uh, we have not interfered with the market to basically to reduce access to our competition. They don't accept that premise. But and yeah, generally speaking, it's a very interesting one. I am all for, by the way, antitrust laws, and I think it's very important to have those things. I to But not for this specific industry. I have a somewhat different view for this specific industry and how issues should be handled. But it's an interesting case. I don't know what's your take
Yeah,
on the
no.
whole
So
thing.
before you actually say that, I just want to say, Google has been fighting similar battles in Europe for about 2 to 3 years now, where it's also facing antitrust antitrust issues. And I think in Europe specifically, they're saying that Google searches are promoting and favoring Google associated products and companies, so bringing them further to the top. But also Google, I mean, you can run Google ads. Any company can run Google ads, right? So, I mean, I'm sure the more money that you spend, the more access you have to these companies, and the more that you be favored. I don't know if anybody's tried, but if you really don't have any business going on, or if you're not working closely in any way with Facebook and Instagram and of course Google, maybe not Google, I'm not too sure, but Facebook and Instagram, contacting them is impossible. So let's say you're setting up like a Facebook page for business and you suddenly have an issue. You have to fill out this form, this box, and then you send that. And then God knows when they'll answer you. You can just pick up the phone and talk to someone. So access is very limited unless, except I would assume, you're kind of their partner in some way. Even if you're a small business and you're a partner to some extent, I can see them then offering other channels, in a way to like, in order to contact them. For instance, the way that they verify accounts on Instagram and Twitter, all these you need to have a connection somewhere. Where I worked previously, they knew someone, and every now and then they would hand in a list of people for their organization and ask them, hey, could these accounts be verified or not? It's all like, it's kind of in a way who contacting them is extremely hard. So I can easily see how all kinds of favoritism go in once you're a company that works closely with them. But yeah, that
Sure,
was a
yeah,
little, yeah. That was a
but
sidebar, but yeah, let me hear your take. You think antitrust laws are not very well suited for these big tech companies?
no, to be honest, I mean, it's a bit more, perhaps, I don't know, maybe it's a bit more radical, or perhaps maybe you think it's more idiotic, but I think they should basically be treated as public utilities.
Mm.
And maybe I don't know if nationalized is the right word, but there should be significant public control over them. Either sort of kind of like NHS or the French system, as in either completely owned by the government or uh, like government contracts it out to private contractors that perform the services for certain amounts. But yeah, I think that's how we should approach that. Because, for example, I think Google search has replaced the yellow pages, basically, has replaced there used to be these, booklets of, local businesses that would be in at your house. Or they Skype has Skype, WhatsApp, video call, that type of technology has replaced basically the telephone system,
Mm-hmm.
you know. So I think that's how they've become. I know they are not essential in a sense that, of course, we don't die without using, WhatsApp video call or anything. But for a modern life, they are sort of an essential thing. So they should be treated more like, I think, utilities like water, gas, that type of thing. And
Yeah,
that's
I
the way
mean,
to go. Although at the same time, it would be uh, there has to be clear and strict safeguards to avoid, you know, government abuses or fascistic abuses, that type of thing. It would be risky. It has its own risks, but I think that's the better way to go than having private individuals and private uh, corporations, or basically having control.
yeah, I
Um,
mean, especially Google's like search engine. I guess maybe you'd have to break down which parts should be more under government control or under state control. But I mean, their search engine is as vital as pretty much anything else to both the consumers, like just
I
the ordinary
cannot
persons.
imagine a, I cannot imagine a business active in this day and age that doesn't like it does not significantly rely on internet and and Google search engine.
Yeah, hundred
It's
percent. And it is this private company that is controlling all this. I was giving an example the other day for people to understand how a website will become like a website can become prominent. It's just as if a website is kind of, if you open a new store in the real world, nobody will know about it. So you kind of have to build a reputation, and then people might know about it, and they'll be like, "Oh, you want to buy shoes? Go there." And a website is exactly the same. So Google has to start thinking, whoa, this is a good website that I should send people to. So I'm sure a lot of these are very fair and
I
democratic
mean,
ways, how they decide fair ways, but much of it could be the
to be
complete
fair,
opposite.
I, I would say Google has been much better than, for example, landowners in high streets
Hmm.
in major cities. It has been fairer than them in many ways. There is in traditional economy was not exactly fair game
Yeah,
either.
100%.
Pre-digital whatever, because you could argue Google's first page for businesses has replaced that that piece of property on high street,
Mm-hmm.
in a way. So I argue they have been better than most, but that's been sort of a choice they have been making, probably because right now they're a growing business. They're trying to create that
Exactly.
base. So it could change, and there is no guarantees. So, yeah, they have probably too much control as a private company with private interest.
I mean, in a way, they're an extremely young company in some ways, if you think about it. I mean, what were Google 20 years ago? That's nothing.
Yeah, relative to, Boeing and all that. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But
But
so,
uh, it's been an interesting story. One thing I like to mention, though, I was watching this video on YouTube, which hopefully we share the link at the bottom. Interesting video, explained it in good details, and I think at one point the person mentioned that the uh, budget for FTC, Federal Trade Commission, which is the organization that is pushing the government to sue these companies. The budget for them per year is $500 million. And I think he's mentioned that Facebook's operating cost for 2 days is 500 million. So,
Yeah.
one way probably to, discourage more of these behavior is probably to increase their budget. And yeah, they had less than a year ago, they had a fine against Facebook for $5 billion for because of its uh, systematic breaking of laws related to personal data as well as related to other issues. And TechCrunch, which is a famous website covering tech industry news and all that, they described it as a joke, as a laughable thing, because following that, the prices for Facebook stock went up. So, and it like they need to go like the cost for these companies needs to be huge for them to change their behavior and for them to actually hurt. So we may end up with a lawsuit that ends with another sort of a small fine for the company and leads to nothing. But it could go the other way as
I
well.
mean, it's hard to imagine what kind of fine would even make any difference for Google. I mean, I don't think there's any number, unless we're talking about in the billions or something, that would make any difference. It has to definitely be some
Yeah,
other type of
trillions. Yeah,
punishment
yeah, yeah.
against them. I mean, this is nothing. I mean, there needs to be some kind of laws banning certain practices or, something outright like that.
Yeah, maybe, yeah, yeah. Significant regulations, uh, breakup, you know, basically like
But
what happened to oil companies early 1920s, I think, or
yeah,
1910s. So yeah, maybe yeah, something like that would be definitely more damaging.
but I
But
like your
yeah,
I was gonna say
no, go ahead.
I like your suggestion, especially now I think of it, especially when it comes to Google search and search product. I mean, yeah, what would be better if you were sure that there was a kind of regulated and as fair as possible search engine available where everything's under one, or if you had a few that you had to access. I don't know which
And
one from
and
a consumer point of
but
view would be better and more practical.
yeah, and by the way, there is precedent for that, as in telephone companies. I believe telephone industry started as private companies, and then it became, then there was a Ministry of Communication or Telephone or in whatever it was called, you know. So there is precedent for that, and or for example, Uber or similar services, they could easily be integrated into the postal services and postal ministry and that type of thing, you know. And to be honest, it may, I'm not saying it would, because government has to basically be far more responsible than a private company, but it could even lead to revenue generated, as we mentioned, because of the economies of a scale and all that. Obviously, government is in a better position to, take advantage of those things. So, I think it could be a job creator, revenue creator, and would be beneficial for everybody, to be honest.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, Google can't really come out and say, "Oh, now with competition, that's what pushing us to innovate and make better products," since there is no competition. So how could competition be what's pushing them further? So I think it kind of
Exactly.
takes that argument away from them.